Chapter 161, 159. Where is the magical basilisk? I don't know if there was a guaranteed mechanism for the lottery, but either way, there had been a big surprise at the end. Dudley was pretty pleased. It was truly silent but deadly. The cosmic phantom beast fist came from the Ultraman series special effects dramas. It was the famed technique of Master Aludi of the D60 Dragon Star, and later adopted by the Ultimate Family's Absolute Diablo, companion to the one who called himself the Ultimate Life Form, Absolute Tartarus. In the Ultra world, Cosmic Phantom Beast Fist was known as the top boxing style. Within it, the mighty breaking ox fist was the most destructive technique, capable of tremendous force. Absolute Diablo's real-world performance had been underwhelming, but that only showed his lack of skill, not the technique's potential. Unfortunately, at Dudley's current level, he couldn't hope to reproduce the terrifying power shown in the series. He couldn't transform. Still, it was a useful hidden trump card, at least roughly comparable to an LV5 Iron Mountain Lean. After acquiring such a powerful option, Dudley fed a bag of rations to the fire dragon and another to Xiaoma Baoli, then headed for Hogwarts Castle. He returned quickly. The first thing he did at the castle was release the acromantulas. With a flash of white light, the spiders he'd brought from the Forbidden Forest appeared in the corridor. As intended bait for the basilisk, they were extremely sensitive to its aura. In the part of the castle where the basilisk lurked, the spiders froze almost instantly. Their 8 legs drew tight, curling into tight balls, spider balls refusing to move. It was pure fear of a natural predator. Move or be crushed. Choose one. Dudley stroked their heads lightly, his indifferent voice making those unlucky acromantulas shudder. This human was like a natural predator to them, if anything, far worse. A natural predator might kill a few and then leave. Dudley had slaughtered countless of their kind. Reluctantly, they stretched out and moved. If given a choice, they would have preferred death to coming back to this place. Dudley tied a rope to each acromantula and started tracking the basilisk by their reactions. The spiders didn't want to cooperate. Who would? But Dudley had a simple trick. The more they resisted going in a direction, the more he dragged them that way. Reverse radar. With ordinary acromantula brains, they would never guess how he located the right place. He hauled them down to the girls' lavatory on the 2nd floor. So the basilisk had gone back here, apparently. Dudley found the bronze tap with the little snake carving, spoke a few words to the snakehead, and it split and twisted aside, revealing the secret passage. He slipped in smoothly, clearly not the first time he'd been in the Chamber of Secrets. He wasn't a parcel mouth, but he was what you might call a magical creature mouth. He understood the languages of snake-like magical creatures. The passage was wet and slippery, covered in moss, fungi, and mushrooms that had not been cleared away for ages. Dudley picked some as he went, then reached the passage's end. He landed steadily on stone deeper than the Slytherin common room. It was pitch black ahead. Even with good light-gathering eyes, he couldn't see without a source of light. With a casual flick, a beam shot from his finger and illuminated the way. Dudley had mastered light spells to an art. If he used his full strength, a certain inhuman vampire would suffer. Compared to the well-stocked passage above, only a few shade-loving plants grew here. In a small open space lay a huge shed snakeskin, fresh. The basilisk had recently sloughed it. Dudley, never one to waste good materials, took it. A basilisk hide, especially from a millennial serpent, was excellent, tough, resistant to some charms, and a superb potion ingredient. At the tunnel's end, 2 stone snakes twisted together on a wall. Dudley spoke in parcel tongue, and the stones slowly parted. The chamber beyond was broader and slightly brighter. He could see the floor without his light spell. A few acromantulas refused to step further now, clear sign the basilisk was nearby. Dudley recalled them into their red and white spheres. This area opened into a plaza with tall stone pillars carved with coiling snakes, their shadows stretching under a ceiling that faded into darkness, all shrouded in a faint green haze. It felt like a villain's secret base. Every little sound echoed. At the far end stood a statue with an old monkey-like face, sparse long whiskers, and eyes horribly out of proportion, leering, ugly. Dudley wondered if it was Slytherin's sense of humor or just terrible taste. While he scanned the room, Dudley reached for another red and white sphere on his waist. Inside were the roosters he'd taken from Hagrid's hut on his way here, and a few he'd bought outside. Hagrid had told him his roosters often disappeared. Legend claimed roosters were the basilisk's natural predators. The crowing of a rooster could harm or even kill a basilisk. How true that was debatable. Roosters are common creatures, and if Slytherin truly exalted the basilisk as the king of serpents, a mere ordinary rooster killing it seemed unlikely. Besides, basilisks were said to hatch from the eggs of roosters incubated by toads, which suggested a connection rather than fear. Dudley suspected the rooster that was once the basilisk's predator might have been a different magical creature with the same name. Still, having roosters couldn't hurt. The Data Magic Eye's scan showed no trace of the basilisk, and Audrina was nowhere to be found. That didn't rule out other ways of hiding from the eye, especially since the Acromantulas were cowering. So where was the basilisk? A few bubbles slowly rose to the surface of the water behind Dudley. Chapter 162, 160. Is this Lord Voldemort in drag? A massive snake head rose slowly from the water, its huge yellow eyes fixed on Dudley's back. It glided forward without a sound. When it was less than 2 meters away, it opened its jaws, 2 fangs flashing coldly. The basilisk struck, but hit nothing. At the exact moment the head lunged, Dudley dodged, narrowly avoiding a killing blow. The snake rattled its head in obvious displeasure and turned, coiling to charge again. Its eyes were deadly only on direct contact, so as long as he didn't look into them, Dudley was safe. He swept a hand to his waist, grabbed several potions, and hurled them. Yellow liquid sprayed everywhere and drenched the basilisk. It only slowed for a moment. The serpent's magical resistance was extraordinary. A basilisk's skin, after all, was said to be harder than a dragon's. Seizing his chance, Dudley pulled a strange orb from his belt. Go! The red and white ball opened with a pop, and a flurry of roosters burst out, squawking and flapping in disarray. The basilisk's face flickered with pain at the noise. Its thick tail lashed through the air, eradicating the flock in a few brutal swings. That outcome had been expected. The roosters were a diversion. Dudley vanished in a dark step and reappeared at the basilisk's tail, catching it in both arms. With snake-like creatures, there are 2 ways to subdue them. Strike the vital point 7 inches from the head, or take hold of the tail and shake hard enough to dislocate the bones. The latter was theory hard to pull off in practice. It demanded immense strength and technique. Dudley had neither shortage of strength nor the recently learned LV2 bone-shattering hand skill, which claimed it could dislocate any bone. He gripped the tail, concentrated all his power in his arms, locked onto a bone, and swung. Shock, then another swing, 3 violent shakes, and the basilisk, which had been thrashing, shuddered and went suddenly limp, collapsing to the ground. With its bones dislocated, it could not move. Muscles alone couldn't carry it. The 1,000-year-old basilisk was subdued in disbelief-inducing seconds and hadn't even managed to use its death gaze. Wait. Dudley's brow narrowed. Something was off. The creature was indeed a basilisk, but far smaller than the one whose skin he had taken earlier. It didn't match in size. Could it be? Clap, clap, clap. A crisp male voice accompanied the clapping. As expected of the most outstanding student at Hogwarts, even I wasn't this powerful at your age. That's right, another basilisk, the voice continued. One I've recently bred. Dudley realized why Hagrid's roosters had gone missing instead of being found dead. They'd been driven off and destroyed by this smaller basilisk. The air twisted, and a figure stepped out. Audrina, missing for a long time, appeared, a glittering diadem resting on her head. It was Ravenclaw's diadem, a Horcrux of Lord Voldemort. Although Audrina had a woman's body, her voice was male, and a second male face seemed to float over her features like a shadow. The faces overlapped, neither entirely female nor entirely male, and in the blur one could make out a handsome man's visage, presumably Voldemort, at the moment he created the Horcrux. Seeing the dress the figure wore, a ridiculous thought popped into Dudley's head. Is this Lord Voldemort in drag? He couldn't help himself. Dudley pulled out an old camera, snapped several pictures, and slid the device back into his pocket. What are you doing? Audrina, Voldemort asked, baffled. Such machines did not exist in his era. Nothing, Dudley said, just a little gadget. He changed the subject. There's one thing I'm curious about. Go on, Audrina answered politely, almost patiently. Since you can ignore her thoughts and control her body, why don't you just leave? If you truly wanted to hide, you'd be impossible to find. Leave? Audrina spread a hand as if the idea were absurd. Why should I leave? You're at Hogwarts, full of powerful professors. Dudley reminded him. A shadow crossed the Horcrux's expression, but he spoke with the full arrogance of the Dark Lord. Just a few professors, hardly worth my time. The only one I ever considered an obstacle is no longer here. His tone held no fear. He had the right to speak like that. Even as a Horcrux, the aura around him felt stronger than any professor Dudley had met. In Voldemort's eyes, the whole wizarding world likely amounted to no more than Dumbledore. Aurors, the Ministry, mere annoyances. Audrina, Voldemort, tilted his head and smiled. You're Slytherin, and you can speak Parseltongue. I wanted to see how a Slytherin younger than me fares. I've heard much about you. Dudley stayed guarded. This thing was far more dangerous than the basilisk he'd just felled. And, what do you think of me now? Better than I expected, Audrina said without restraint, then offered something that made Dudley's skin prickle. Join me, become my subordinate, and I will give you everything you desire. Chapter 163, 161. Senior Tom, you are also just a half-blood. Money, power, strength, women, whatever you want, I can give it to you. Lord Voldemort painted a glittering future for Dudley, but it was all just promises. He was trying to entice Dudley into joining him. Once Dudley agreed, he'd be brought aboard this pirate ship. As long as Voldemort wasn't entirely mad, he still had the instincts of a leader. As a Slytherin, you should know who I am and what I can do. Dudley said nothing. Audrina Voldemort grew impatient. Well, what's your answer? Listening to the offer, Dudley drew one conclusion. Memories and Horcruxes didn't share everything. Otherwise, Voldemort would have known Dudley had killed him more than once. If Voldemort had known, he wouldn't be trying to recruit him, and Avada Kedavra would have been a more honest greeting. Then again, maybe Voldemort was pretending ignorance on purpose. Dudley smiled and spread his hands. My dear senior, I think you're jumping the gun. I'm only 12. I haven't started thinking about the future yet. It was a ridiculous excuse, too ridiculous for Voldemort to believe. Do you take me for a fool? Audrina's expression hardened. All right, since you insist on hearing the truth. He paused. Dudley shrugged. I'm Dudley Dursley. I like saying no to people who think too highly of themselves. So you're refusing. Audrina's face went dark. Very well. Dudley glanced away from the threat and with a small, quiet movement, unfastened the red and white sphere at his waist. A tiny blue-skinned creature popped out, made a ridiculous face, let out a strange little laugh, and vanished down the corridor. Dudley thought, if only I could make a phone call. It would be so much easier. Then an idea hit him, something he'd seen before. You want to know why I failed, why I lost to a baby who knew nothing. I wanted to see your brother, Harry Potter. From what I've seen, he's just a slightly brighter little wizard. Nothing more. I'm powerful. He has nothing. Do you know why? Dudley asked. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. Were these questions meant to glean information from him? Dudley, turning his back slightly, mimicked whispering to himself. Is it possible he's a very well-hidden dark wizard? Is it possible there's something wrong with your magic? Is it possible it's prophecy, destiny? The last word made Audrina's expression change. Of course, that prophecy. He had gone after Harry because of a prophecy, and because of it he died. He swore softly, I'll kill him with my own hands and break whatever fate tied me to him. Then, abruptly changing tack, Audrina smiled cruelly. By the way, want to know where the other basilisk is? It should be with your little girlfriend now, he said. She will be reflected in those pale yellow eyes and die without pain. Many will die at Hogwarts. It will be utterly shut down. He looked at Dudley, expecting panic. Dudley didn't flinch. No one will die, senior. Dudley glanced at a crude statue nearby. It came through the pipes from here to different parts of Hogwarts. You know? Audrina's triumphant smile froze. How could you possibly know that? Ness, is it possible it betrayed you and joined me? Impossible. I am the heir of the Chamber of Secrets. I am the heir of Slytherin. Perhaps I am too, Dudley interrupted. But you should add former before heir. Don't forget, you were already dead. Even if you were the heir, you stopped being one the moment you died. Parcel tongue. I can speak it too, Dudley said. You're nothing but a muggle wizard, Dursley. Audrina snapped, voice breaking with anger and something like hurt. Senior Tom Riddle, don't forget. You are a half-blood wizard, Dudley said pointedly. The words cut through him. He paused as if struck. Dudley had seen straight through his greatest insecurity with one sentence. If Dudley could do it, then so could Dudley, he thought. An insult turned back on him like a blade. Whoosh! A dark green charm shot toward Dudley. He rolled and dodged it easily. Senior, that's dangerous, he said, all mock innocence. Then, as if enlightened, he added, getting agitated, are we? Audrina's face tightened. In argument, the one who strikes first is often the one who's lost their cool. He raised his hand to cast again, but the spell missed. Charm after charm flew, but Dudley danced around them, neat and quick. Even powerful spells are useless when they don't hit a target. Watching the way Audrina cast, Dudley realized something important. This version of Voldemort was not even as skilled as Professor Quirrell had been in the Forbidden Forest last year. That Quirrell-hosted fragment of Voldemort had been incomplete, yes, but it still held more of the old master's technique. This current presence, hanging on by draining life from young wizards, was weaker in both power and finesse. He wasn't nearly the force he'd been. You purposely dragged me here because you're afraid of the other professors, Dudley said. You're scared they'll beat you, and you're terrified they'll discover who you are. You're talking nonsense, Audrina shrieked, the voice suddenly thin and soprano. It sounded weak, truly weak. Even after feeding on a young wizard, he was far from his prime. Faced with any real professor, except Lockhart, that fraud, he would have no chance. Audrina had been arrogant. He never expected Dudley, a mere student, to be so difficult. He'd assumed he had overestimated his opponent, but the truth was worse. He had underestimated him. And that mistake might be the decisive one. He shouldn't have provoked Dudley. Chapter 164, 162. A basilisk will never be a slave. This was the moment Lord Voldemort was distracted. Dudley's hand glowed with a faint red light, and countless stone arms erupted from the air, grabbing Audrina, Voldemort's body at once, pinning her and snatching her wand away. Senior Tom, it seems I've won. Dudley's voice rang in her ears as he stepped forward. No. Amid Audrina's screams, Dudley tore the diadem from her head. The instant it came free, her skin drained from a normal hue to an ashen gray, and she began to age at an alarming rate. Wrinkles erupted across her face, and her golden hair silvered. Life force was being pulled out of her. She had no one to blame but herself for trusting a Horcrux. If she'd listened to Madison, none of this would have happened. Sungay's warning had been blunt. Never trust anything that can think for itself unless you can see where it hides its mind. The diadem in Dudley's hand warmed, then scorched, trembling as though it wanted to escape. At the same time, a chorus of whispering voices filled his ears, tempting, threatening, trying to take control. A Horcrux could never fully revive on the life force of a single small wizard. It would need many victims. Voldemort, trapped in the diadem, had a plan. Remove Dudley, unleash the basilisk to slaughter the small wizards, and siphon their life amid the chaos until it was whole again. It was a good plan on paper, but plans rarely survive reality. The whispers made Dudley dig at his ears. A golden light crept up his arm. Under that light, the diadem screamed and a thin black smoke curled from it. Ripple Chi Gong was the bane of dark creatures, Horcruxes included, and the technique began to burn the corruption. Unfortunately, Voldemort's remnant soul was fused tightly to the diadem. You could not remove the soul without destroying the object. What had once been a perfectly good heirloom was now a blighted artifact. What a waste. But then, Voldemort had always been prodigal with treasures. His Horcruxes were either heirloom relics of the Four Founders or the Deathly Hallows. A pity. Dudley found a small box in his pocket, shoved the diadem inside, and left the Chamber of Secrets. There was now something more urgent, the Millennial Serpent. When he arrived, Fawkes was darting through the narrow corridor, trading blows with the basilisk, while Pixie provided backup with quick hands and small magics. The students had been evacuated. As a top-tier magical creature, the Phoenix wasn't far off the basilisk in power, but this particular serpent had slept for 1,000 years and had been starving. It bore a crimson crest on its head, marking it male, something the chamber's old basilisk had lacked. Pixie's sort of magic was useful against small, vulnerable creatures like house elves, but it did little against a huge, magically resistant beast. Pixie could distract. Fawkes had to do the fighting. "Stop! The command has been lifted," Dudley called out. "The hair no longer exists." Whether Dudley's parcel tongue made any difference or not, the basilisk's movements slowed. Dudley heard the creature's voice for the first time, hoarse, as if its throat had been slit. "Hungry. Eat. Stupid bird." Only 3 words, but they meant everything. Sealed away in the chamber for a millennium, the basilisk had slept through starvation more than once. Had Senior Tom not awakened it 50 years ago, it might already have died. Even then, Tom hadn't bothered to feed it properly. He kept it caged for another 50 years. If it hadn't been extraordinarily gifted, it would have withered. Now it was ravenous. "I can give you food, but you must stop," Dudley offered. "Eat," the basilisk repeated. "Stupid bird," it spat back, dismissive of Dudley. It wanted Fawkes, wanted to fill itself first. It would never obey a heir again. Its contract had expired with the last heir's death. Obedience meant endless starvation. It wanted freedom. The basilisk lunged, but before it could turn its head, Dudley tightened something around its tail. In an instant, a tremendous force seized it, and the serpent was hurled into the corridor wall with a thunderous impact. Stone crumbled. Millennium-old Hogwarts castle, 10 HP. Thank Merlin for repairing charms, otherwise Dudley would have been accused of destroying ancient architecture. The basilisk's stomach convulsed, a chorus of acid and hunger, and it snarled, mind shrinking around one new smell. There, on the floor, a bag, pellets. Magical creature food, serpent exclusive. Fragrant, it thought. The smell overwhelmed it. Even Fawkes in the air vanished from importance. The basilisk surged forward and swallowed the bag whole. The taste flooded its mouth. Rich, satisfying, a flavor it could not forget. It almost squinted with pleasure. Just a hint, and it was addicted. "Want more?" a voice asked in its ear. Unbeknownst to the basilisk, Dudley had climbed onto its head. By riding up there, he didn't have to risk its gaze and could still speak parcel tongue. "Yes," the basilisk answered without thinking. It wasn't dumb, perhaps on par with a phoenix, and the offer registered clearly. "Then become my companion, like you in Slytherin," Dudley proposed. "That's impossible," the basilisk muttered. "You are not the heir. The heir is dead. I am free. But I can speak parcel tongue too. I'm free now. I won't be bound like that again." The basilisk imagined itself roaming untethered, finally fed and unfettered. The dream of freedom was bright. The anger at heirs and contracts was older than hunger. But Dudley's promise lingered. "You can eat this all you want. You won't starve." Those words fixed the basilisk. To hell with lofty notions of liberty. A basilisk will never be a slave unless room and board are included. Chapter 165, 163. Basilisk. That's Gryffindor. Salazar Slytherin can keep a basilisk as a pet, so why couldn't Dudley? Legend said Slytherin had left a chamber of secrets in Hogwarts, and only a true blood descendant could become its heir and inherit the basilisk. But the Sorting Hat and the basilisk were not bloodline detectors. They could not truly tell who was pure blood. The idea of pure blood was too vague. What did that even mean? Was Tom Riddle truly pure blood? Yet he had been the chamber's heir. Slytherin's test for an heir had been parcel tongue. Anyone who could speak it qualified. So when Dudley learned to speak parcel tongue, the basilisk took to him. There could only be one heir, and when Lord Voldemort fell, the old magical contract had effectively broken. Contracts require both parties' agreement. The basilisk happily swallowed the food Dudley provided. It was the best meal it had had in 1,000 years. It narrowed its eyes contentedly, flicked its forked tongue, and was visibly in a good mood. Dudley was an additional master, but at least this one was better than the last. He fed it and made sure it was full. Dudley certainly wasn't going to keep the basilisk in Hogwarts. Now, he rode it toward the Forbidden Forest. The forest was vast enough for more than one basilisk, and it held the creature's favorite prey, acromantulas. He settled the basilisk near the acromantulas' hollow. An occasional trip there for a snack made sense. It wasn't petty revenge against the spiders. Dudley was thinking about the whole forest. With no natural predators, the acromantulas reproduced too quickly. If nothing checked them, half the Forbidden Forest could become their territory, throwing the entire ecosystem out of balance. He thought it through with a sort of pragmatic coldness. "There's one thing I'm curious about," Dudley said as he sat on the basilisk's head. "Why did Slytherin make his statue inside the chamber look so lewd?" "Did he really look like that?" the basilisk replied. The full-grown basilisk spoke now in a voice clearer and smarter than Dudley had expected. "That's not Slytherin's statue. In your wizard terms, the old master was very handsome," it added, as if remembering, "even in old age." The basilisk flicked its tongue and sniffed the air greedily. This place was far preferable to the dark, stale chamber. A basilisk might not be picky about surroundings, but why stay somewhere miserable when you could choose a better home? If the statue in the chamber wasn't Slytherin's, whose was it? Dudley's guess was answered succinctly. "It's the old master's good friend, Gryffindor's." Of course. Designing Gryffindor's statue as the basilisk's lair and having the serpent slide in and out of Gryffindor's mouth, Slytherin's sense of mischief had been genius, devilish even. Considering how the Sorting Hat's songs had gone after Slytherin, the two had been a perfect pair of troublemakers. "Can you tell me how to get Slytherin's permissions at Hogwarts?" Dudley asked. "You'd have to pass the old master's trial," the basilisk said. "And Tom, did he pass? He learned the old master's knowledge, but didn't take the trial." "Why not?" "He wasn't qualified." "What qualifications?" "I don't know." The basilisk knew scraps of gossip from 1,000 years ago, but not detailed history. It had been born a long time after many events. Mostly it knew rumors. Gryffindor's fondness for Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff's good opinion of Gryffindor, that Gryffindor's sword had been commissioned by Slytherin and forged by goblins. For whatever reason, most of its stories seemed to circle back to Gryffindor. "I'll visit now and then," Dudley promised. "Bring you your favorite food." They reached a raised clearing near the Acromantula's main hollow. Dudley set some ground rules. "Aside from the Acromantulas over there, don't go killing other magical creatures." Unchecked, the Acromantulas were already a major threat. In their heartland, even ordinary creatures were being eaten into rarity. Insects had become scarce. Aragog had long restrained the spiders from attacking humans, but he was old and fading. Some spiders had already begun disobeying orders. Once Aragog died, the colony would inevitably prey on humans again. Its nature. It was dangerous, not just loose talk. "There's nothing here that can withstand your gaze," the basilisk observed. Its eyes killed anyone who met them, wizard or creature. Maybe powers like Voldemort's or Dumbledore's could resist, maybe not. Passive effects like that always carried the danger of unintended harm. Dudley thought of possibilities with a planner's eye. Once the basilisk was tamed enough, it could be developed further, even used as a tool. Imagine wearing it somehow at the waist as a terrifying defensive measure. For now, however, its gaze made it incompatible with keeping alongside the fire dragons. The passive nature of its instant death stare meant accidental eye contact would be lethal. "Understood. I'll sleep for a bit," the basilisk said, and coiled itself to rest. Unlike other snakes that hid when they slept, it lay out in the open. At its level, it was a top predator. What would dare to attack it? Dudley had no plans to keep it with the dragons until he could control that gaze. Leaving the Forbidden Forest, Dudley went straight to the headmaster's office. Fawkes had already returned to his place and was preening. The phoenix chirped excitedly at Dudley's arrival. "Thanks for this," Dudley said, handing Fawkes a bag of magical creature food. The bird chirped happily and tucked its head down to feast. As Fawkes's feathers grew brighter and more vibrant, Dudley realized something else. Wasn't it about time for Fawkes to undergo his rebirth? Now, rather than rebirth, the phoenix seemed merely to have put on a little weight. "Dudley," Fawkes seemed to scold with a bright trill, "if you keep feeding me like this, I won't be able to fly. I've searched the whole book, and I can't find anywhere it says the statue is actually Slytherin, nor do I know where the claim that Salazar Slytherin is written under the statue came from. Of course, the movies don't count." Chapter 166, 164. Was it intentional or accidental? A steady, gentle voice rang out as Dumbledore, looking uncannily like a snow-white Gandalf in a flowing robe, appeared in the headmaster's office. Dudley's vision blurred for an instant, and he almost mistook him for someone else. Fawkes, noticing Dumbledore, poked his head out of the cage, let out an irritated squawk, and then went back to eating. It seems I returned just in time, Dumbledore said, walking over. It seems you've already dealt with the problem. Dudley stared at the white robe and said bluntly, Professor, you turning up exactly now makes me suspect you did it on purpose. If they were casting Lord of the Rings, Dudley thought, Dumbledore could easily do a cameo. How could I purposely put a student in danger? Dumbledore replied, then gave Dudley an utterly unconvincing wink. Seeing Dudley's expression, he added helplessly, I did leave you powerful helpers. Dudley nodded. Fawkes was a very good helper. Hey! A disgruntled voice interrupted. The sorting hat, perched on the cabinet, must have been frowning, if that could be called a frown. I think there was another very good helper here, and you didn't use me at all. Dumbledore had left Dudley two things. Fawkes and the sword of Gryffindor tucked inside the sorting hat. Dudley hadn't used the sorting hat, and he certainly hadn't taken up the sword. It was magnificent, but Dudley didn't know how to wield a blade. Swordsmanship simply wasn't in his skill set. He wondered, half amused, half suspicious, whether Dumbledore had set this whole scenario up the way he had for Harry. What a pity, Dumbledore murmured as he sat down. So who was the culprit? Senior Tom and his basilisk, Dudley said. You know him? Dumbledore asked. Dudley ran a fingertip over the headmaster's desk, snapped his fingers with the other hand, and letters rose up in the air before rearranging themselves into a name. Tom Riddle, I am Lord Voldemort. Dudley's wandless display was simple and direct. Excellent wandless magic, Dumbledore praised, then studied Dudley. Knowing his identity, aren't you afraid? Dudley's eyebrows rose. The tone felt like a test. He was killed by Harry at his peak. I defeated him in my first year. He's clinging to life now. What is there to fear? Given Harry's history with Voldemort, Dudley was naturally hostile toward him. A splintered soul, one Horcrux destroyed and another captured, Voldemort was weak. Unless he managed to be reborn, he posed little threat. You really should have come to Gryffindor, Dumbledore said lightly. Courage was a Gryffindor trait, and Dudley had plenty of that, in muscle at least. Slytherin isn't so bad, he replied. They're part of Hogwarts too, part of the family. If they strayed, someone should correct them. If they didn't correct themselves, he'd do it, by putting his face in line for a punch if necessary. They valued bloodlines, profit, calculation. Oughtn't they be steered toward honor, justice, and nobler things? If Dumbledore, as headmaster, gave up on them, who else would try? You are right, Dumbledore said with a smile. Dudley was oddly like someone Dumbledore knew, yet not the same. Professor Dumbledore, I need your help with something. Dudley produced Ravenclaw's lost diadem from his fanny pack. This is Senior Tom has a particular fondness for relics left by Rowena. Is there any way to separate his presence from this? Dumbledore's eyes darkened as he saw faint, black wisps crawling from the diadem. A Horcrux. To make a Horcrux, one had to murder and tear one's soul. With a piece anchored in an object, a person could not be wholly destroyed, while any Horcrux survived. Dumbledore had long suspected Voldemort of such things, and seeing the diadem confirmed it. I have no way either, Dumbledore said after a long, helpless sigh. The soul fragment clung to the diadem so tightly that separating it without destroying the object seemed impossible. Perhaps a master alchemist of some legendary age would know, but those masters were long dead. What a pity. Such a treasure can only be destroyed. Dudley accepted that answer. He drew a transmutation circle on the office floor, placed the diadem inside, clapped his hands, and poured his power into it. Red light flared. Voldemort's familiar screams wailed as the Horcrux unraveled, and the diadem was transmuted into component parts. An emerald piece of the diadem, some metal fragments, a small cluster of other materials, and, strangely, a philosopher's stone among the results. This ability is truly useful, Dudley said, matter-of-factly. Dumbledore's eyes widened. Even an object that had been ordinary before becoming a Horcrux was not easily undone. Dumbledore himself had needed many tools and tricks to destroy them. Dudley's transmutation had done the impossible. Dumbledore had tried the same circle Dudley had drawn, but it reacted to nothing. To Dumbledore, it looked like ordinary, if regular scribbles. Only Dudley could activate the pattern. A wizard's exclusive ability wasn't unheard of. There were metamorph magi, parcel mouths, bloodline charms. But Dudley's power wasn't in any known category. Perhaps a distant magical strain in the Dursley or Evans family, lay dormant in him. Dumbledore had no interest in tracing the source. There were more pressing matters. "Oh, right, there's one more thing," Dudley said suddenly. He sounded as if the thought had just occurred to him. "There's a student. She's possessed by Senior Tom. She's still lying in the Chamber of Secrets." Dudley had either forgotten to mention it earlier or had left it out on purpose. Either way, the fact remained. Someone in the chamber needed help. Chapter 167. Lucius, you must take full responsibility for this math. The professors, who had been absent for some time, finally returned to Hogwarts. When they dragged Audrina out of the Chamber of Secrets, she was barely clinging to life. Hair shot through with gray, face creased and gaunt, skin hanging loose. She looked like a woman in her 70s or 80s. The diadem had drained much of her life force. They also recovered the smaller basilisk. Its bones had been dislocated, but otherwise it was perfectly preserved. Eyes, fangs, scales, and flesh intact. Its gaze no longer had the instant kill power it had in life, but the eyes could still be used to create petrification artifacts. The sight of the basilisk drew a stunned chorus from the students. Even those who'd never heard of such a creature could tell, from its size and terrifying presence, that it was not to be trifled with. When they learned that Dudley had defeated it and that the Chamber of Secrets crisis had been resolved, astonishment turned to admiration. "He is indeed the one Dursley," they whispered, and Dudley's reputation at Hogwarts rose accordingly. Gryffindors and others spoke of him with newfound respect. With the immediate danger past, there was nothing more to be done but wait. Dudley, the central figure of the affair, sat at his desk composing a letter. When he sent Hedwig off with his message, he climbed to the castle's lookout tower, letting the cool breeze brush his face as he looked out over the grounds. For some, relief; for others, a calamity. That same night, a man who had been comfortably at ease in his own courtyard received news that shattered his composure. It sent the proud aristocrat into a rage. On the morning of the third day, as students settled at the long tables to breakfast, the doors of the great hall were violently flung open and crashed against the wall. Lucius Malfoy swept in like a storm, striding straight for the high table. His face was ashen, his eyes bloodshot and furious. He might as well have been spitting fire. The Minister for Magic, Fudge, was not with him. Lucius had come alone. Dumbledore greeted him with the same calm warmth he always wore. "Good morning, Lucius," he said. "Have you had breakfast? Would you care to join us?" Lucius stared daggers at him and advanced a step. He looked every inch a man undone, rage pressing through his voice. Dumbledore. Only the night before, he had learned that the remaining 11 governors of Hogwarts had signed a petition reviewed by the Ministry and decided by the Wizengamot, and his position as a governor had been revoked, effective immediately. If anything had gone wrong at any point in those 3 stages, Lucius might have held on to the title. He had thrown money and influence into undoing the decision, but every attempt had been rebuffed. The 3 bodies had been immovable. He could not understand why. "You took away my position as governor," he spat. "The House of Malfoy has been governors of Hogwarts for generations. Do you know what we've sacrificed?" Dumbledore only shook his head gently. "Lucius, I think you are mistaken. This truly has nothing to do with me." "If it wasn't you, then who was it?" Lucius demanded. Who could sway 11 governors and move both the Ministry and the Wizengamot? He had already suffered heavy losses from backing Voldemort and had narrowly avoided Azkaban. Ministry officials who distrusted him still found excuses to search Malfoy Manor. Losing the governor's seat again would mean further decline for the family's influence. A voice from the Slytherin table cut through the tension. "Uncle Lucius." Lucius turned toward the voice. Richmond Carrow rose from his seat, the current head of the Carrow family, who had seized leadership with ruthless efficiency and turned the family business around after graduation. He was calm, his tone steady. This was the decision of the other 11 governors. "Why are you doing this?" Lucius demanded, flashing his glare. Carrow ignored the glare. He had done his homework. He knew Lucius's hand in certain recent events, that Lucius had been behind Lockhart's acquisition of the Witch and Poison Publishing House, among other scheming. He met Lucius' eyes and answered coldly, "Lucius, how dare you ask why?" He dropped the respectful uncle from his address now. Whatever deference there had been was gone. You believed Dumbledore incompetent. You used threats and bribery to remove him from Hogwarts, had his position revoked, and pushed for his trial before the Wizengamot. The moment you took Dumbledore away, Caro said, his voice hardening, the real manipulator made their move. Lucius's gaze flicked around as Caro spoke. He could feel the truth of accusation as a threat. Of course he had been complicit. He had secretly given Ginny the diary Voldemort had once entrusted to him, fully aware of its danger. He had comforted himself with a vile calculation that if one of the Weasleys were to be harmed, it wouldn't matter much. They had so many children anyway. A thought born of malice and envy toward their large family. He had hoped, in the bitterest part of his heart, that misfortune there would not be noticed. But Caro's next words struck harder than any accusation of politics. "My family paid for your incompetence with my daughter," he said. The youngest Caro daughter suffered greatly. A large amount of her life force was stolen. She is still at St. Mungo's, barely alive. Her life hangs in the balance. He pointed straight at Lucius. "Lucius Malfoy, you must take full responsibility for this." Chapter 168, 166. A new school governor has appeared. How can we stop moving forward? A student had had an accident. It wasn't fatal, unlike the tragedy 50 years ago, but a large portion of her life force had been drained, and she didn't have much time left. The Shaver family, though not one of the Sacred 28, had parents who were ministry officials, and they were already lodging a lawsuit with the Ministry of Magic. Someone had to be held responsible. Originally, as headmaster, Dumbledore would have been the obvious person in charge, but at the time of the incident, he had been dismissed, taken away from Hogwarts, and suspended from his duties. He had not even been present when it happened. How could they reasonably pin responsibility on him? Besides, he had solved the problem as soon as he returned. Blaming him would be ridiculous. So someone else had to take the fall. Who better than Lucius? Wasn't he the one who had led the push to oust Dumbledore? Hadn't he pressured the ministry? The school governors wanted to shift blame. The ministry needed to appease the Shavers, and the Wizengamot wanted to protect its public image. The result was inevitable. Lucius's seat as a school governor was revoked. "The Waysha F family?" Lucius blurted, bewildered for a moment. Did he mean the Shaver family? He was fortunate enough not to verbalize the confusion as Weasley. If he had, it might not have stopped at losing a governorship. Being tied to the death of an underage wizard with dark arts artifacts could have landed him in Azkaban. "Lucius," someone added, "if I were you, I'd stay quietly at home and wait for the ministry to come for you. I hope you enjoy your time with the Wizengamot." Fiki Bali had put a lot of effort into getting Dumbledore in front of the Wizengamot, but the attempt backfired. Dumbledore emerged unscathed, and the whole affair turned against those who had plotted. Lucius could feel his power slipping away. His threats about withdrawing financial support were all he had left. Carol reminded him that he now faced investigations from both the Ministry and the Wizengamot. For years, the Malfoys had been the largest contributors among the 12 Hogwarts governors, which had helped keep them firmly in first place. Had it not been for Lucius's disastrous investment in Lord Voldemort, which had cost the family heavily and weakened their standing, this mistake alone might not have been enough to remove him. "I think the new school governor won't be short of money," Carol said, continuing in the same tone. He'd exaggerated when he called Lucius the biggest donor. 3,000 galleons a year was a fortune for an ordinary wizarding family, but among the truly wealthy, it was sizable, not dominant. Lucius glared. "Oh, you've already found a new governor? Tell me, who is it?" Carol couldn't hide his amusement. "Dursley." "What?" Lucius's face registered uncomprehending shock. "Mr. Dursley," Carol repeated, smiling. Lucius froze. Once Lucius had been the model for many. Elegant, noble, the pinnacle of pure-blood privilege. He had made ministers scramble with a word. During the Dark Lord's rise, he had timed his loyalties perfectly and risen to prominence among the Death Eaters. But now he looked deflated, and Carol's tone, a mix of triumph and pity, only emphasized it. The younger generation thought differently. Carol and others believed their vision was clearer, their influence more relevant. Fellow Hogwarts brothers and sisters, let's congratulate Mr. Dursley on becoming a school governor, Carol announced, and led the applause. Thunderous clapping erupted, beginning at the Slytherin table and quickly spreading through Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Gryffindor. The great hall filled with continuous applause. Dudley, clearly the focus of attention, stood, smiled, and acknowledged the crowd with a modest nod. When he lifted a hand, the applause faded to silence. His influence here felt stronger than Dumbledore's. Dumbledore, seated at the headmaster's table, looked down at Dudley with a bemused smile, inscrutable as always. Snape's face remained impassive, though a brief lift at the corner of his mouth betrayed something like approval. McGonagall and Sprout both looked regretful that Dudley didn't belong to their houses. Lockhart tried to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Each professor betrayed a different emotion. Dudley met Lucius's stare and, with the calm politeness he'd been taught, said, "Mr. Lucius, if you don't mind, you can leave now. It's mealtime." He spoke plainly. "Because of your arrival, we've delayed everyone enough. Breakfast is cold, and students with sensitive stomachs might get an upset stomach." It was unmistakable dismissal. "Mr. Dursley is right," Carol added. "You've held things up long enough, Mr. Lucius. You're no longer a school governor. If you need to speak with any of the professors, wait until everyone's finished eating and approach them as a parent." Carol deliberately stressed the word parent. The implication stung. You. Lucius's face flushed hot with anger. He pointed a trembling finger at Dudley and Carol, unable to form a coherent sentence. His impotence was raw. He could only storm out, his robes rumpled and his dignity in tatters. Watching his father's retreat from the professor's table, Draco shook his head. He felt a small, bitter disappointment at the collapse of the image of the tall, commanding father he'd grown up with. "Father," Draco thought, "I told you not to oppose DG. Why didn't you listen?" DG's methods and capabilities were simply beyond what ordinary minds could grasp. The smart move was to invest, not to oppose. The proud, towering figure Lucius had once been was eroding before Draco's eyes. Draco's thoughts were worrying toward something dangerous. If he were head of the House of Malfoy, he could do far better than his muddled old man. He couldn't stand idly by and watch the family decline under his father's direction. Chapter 169, Carnivorous Slugs. The position of school governor had been reserved for Dudley from the start. It wasn't just a title, it meant influence in the Ministry of Magic. With a few children and relatives connected to you, and with only a handful of magical schools in all of Europe, a seat like that could shape things. Dudley had paid a trivial sum to secure the post. Money was the only thing he truly cared about now. Whether pounds or galleons, he had more than he could count. His Muggle assets were solid and global. In the wizarding world, he'd done even better. The Dragonlance Chronicles had made him a fortune, Wizard Card paid out steady income, and even a vial of acromantula venom from the Forbidden Forest was worth a small fortune. An ounce fetched 100 galleons. He was planning upgrades for Wizard Card and new crossovers, even importing Muggle franchises into the wizarding market. Next on his list, films, merchandise. Dudley came from an era where entertainment ruled, and he understood what it could do for influence and profit. He wanted to give those dour wizards a shock. For all those tactical and sentimental reasons, the chair of head school governor mattered. The British Ministry of Magic was often useless, but money and status made many doors open. Dudley hadn't forgotten that Harry reclaiming the Potter family shampoo business had fit into his wider plan. The Potters had nearly monopolized the wizarding world's shampoo market. There had to be more galleons somewhere. He had already begun buying property in the wizarding world, deliberately choosing a spot near the old Potter home. It was a small obsession of his, to own at least one house, whether among Muggles or wizards. Outside Hogwarts, near the Forbidden Forest, at the gamekeeper's hut, Hagrid had returned from the ministry now that the Chamber of Secrets incident was resolved. He was carrying a huge box and set it down in front of Dudley with a grunt. "Dudley, these are the ones you wanted," Hagrid said, patting the box until it creaked. "Catching those slimy blighters was a real pain," he went on. "They nearly ruined my veg patch, ate loads of cabbages and pumpkins. I tried everything, and they kept coming back when I thought I'd finished them off. They've got no natural predators. Even goblins won't touch them." Hagrid rambled on, excited and proud, explaining their habits and the precautions to take. He tended to jump from topic to topic, but his meaning came through. The box contained carnivorous slugs, carnivorous gastropods. They existed in both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds, but the two types were very different. Muggle carnivorous slugs lived on earthworms, and other slugs were only slightly larger than common slugs and had bright colors. They posed little danger to people. Wizarding carnivorous slugs, however, grew far larger, ate a wider range of prey, even small magical creatures like puffskeins, and could be aggressive toward humans. Their teeth were almost piranha sharp. They weren't picky eaters and would happily strip a vegetable patch bare. For that, I even bought a repellent potion, Hagrid said. Didn't help much. They're tough, and they breed like fox maidens. He lowered his voice on the comparison, as if it were obvious to anyone who dealt with them. Dudley lifted the lid and peered in. The slugs were huge and healthy, writhing together and already trying to gnaw through the cardboard. Their tiny teeth clicked and flashed. "Potion?" Dudley said lightly. "Only a potion maker would want such disgusting, troublesome little things. I heard these slugs are unstable and not really reliable as potion ingredients." Hagrid kept talking, but his voice changed when the conversation turned to what had happened at the Ministry. Dumbledore said, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been let out so soon. You sorted the Chamber of Secrets, found out the truth, and made sure the culprit was punished." He fumbled over the words, embarrassed at his clumsy gratitude. "I treated you and your family badly before, and now you help me. I don't know how to repay you." "It's all right, Hagrid," Dudley said, waving him off. "That was nothing. I was glad to help." Hagrid looked relieved and then brightened. "Actually, is there aught you need? I'm useless at a lot of things, but if there's anything I can do—" "Don't sell yourself short," Dudley replied. "Everyone has their strengths. You're far better at some things than I am." Hagrid thumped his chest with a satisfied puff. "If it's breeding different kinds of magical creatures you need help with, I'm your man." Chapter 170, Hagrid and the Door? "Hey, you've come to the right person for that." At the sound of it, Rubeus Hagrid's beetle-black eyes gleamed. When it came to magical creatures, there seemed to be nothing he didn't know. "I've been working with something recently." Hagrid dropped his voice deliberately, though even his whispers carried like a megaphone. "I'll tell you a secret. I found a manticore in the wood north of the Forbidden Forest." He spoke with relish. A manticore, human head, lion's body, scorpion's tail, the tail tipped with a deadly stinger that can fire venomous barbs in any direction, was as fearsome as he described. Its fur repelled most spells. It was large and vicious, though not the size of the millennial serpent. In the wizarding world, a manticore, like a chimera, ranked among the extremely dangerous and rare beasts. Like the acromantula, it notoriously liked human flesh. The little thing must have been separated from its parents. It was alone in the forest, but it met me. We're friends now. It's a pity there isn't another manticore in the Forbidden Forest, but I've already found it a mate. Hagrid didn't go into the details of how he'd found the manticore, the sort of meeting that probably hadn't been comfortable for the beast, but Dudley's mind, at hearing "little thing," pictured a towering, ferocious creature, not anything small. "What did you find for it?" Dudley asked, trying not to show how odd he thought the match sounded. "A herd of female fire crabs," Hagrid announced as if thrilled. "I think they're perfect." Hagrid's matchmaking certainly hadn't taken the manticore's perspective into account. A manticore wasn't a mere animal. Like Aragog or the Sphinx, it had intelligence to match a human's. Fire crabs, by contrast, were simple magical creatures, mostly aquatic and of limited intelligence. To a manticore what king crabs are to humans. Still, in the original timeline, Hagrid succeeded at something remarkable, crossing a manticore with fire crabs to create a new species, the blast-ended scroot, dangerous, useless, and bred by sheer stubbornness. Reproductive isolation was a rule between species, especially magical ones, so producing viable hybrids required either madness or genius. Hagrid, for all his bumbling, had a knack for it. Dudley cleared his throat and made his request. "I want to breed a batch of shelled carnivorous slugs." There weren't snails of any kind in the wizarding bestiary beyond a few slim relatives. What came closest were carnivorous slugs. Dudley's head was full of other, stranger images, like the light energy snail from Mashinhiro Wataru, but he couldn't get one now. He had taming skills, but not breeding expertise. If anyone could do it, Hagrid could. Shelled carnivorous slugs? Hagrid considered the idea then, patting his great chest, grinned. Don't know why you'd want that, but leave it with me. He sounded like he already had a plan. How long will it take? Dudley wanted to know how long he would be waiting. He could handle 6 months, maybe a year, but not 3 years. Hagrid waved a hand. These slugs breed like rabbits, far easier than a manticore. Shouldn't take more than a month or two. 1 or 2 months was faster than Dudley had dared hope. All right, I'll leave them to you, Hagrid. Hagrid snorted a delighted chuckle, clearly pleased to be useful. With the slug project handed over, Dudley returned to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, deeper beneath the castle. He conjured a small sun in the chamber's center with a lighting spell and searched. The basilisk had said Slytherin had stored not only knowledge but authority over Hogwarts in the chamber. But the catch was, you had to pass whatever trial guarded it first. Dudley wanted that authority badly. Even with his data magic eye's help, he found nothing. He'd been here many times since the basilisk crisis was over. After another fruitless search, he went to the library, spent time with Hermione, did his nightly training, and then returned to his room. The alchemy array's light blinked on the door as he sat at his table and set out his components. He lined up 2 blue magic crystals of different sizes. One had been shrunk during the crafting of the red-white ball. There should have been 3. One of the trio had been made into a ring and given to Hermione. He placed beside them a mass of silvery metal and an emerald, the mithril and the enchanted gem salvaged from disassembling the Ravenclaw diadem. He pulled out another item as well, the wand he'd taken from Ollivander's, little used and mostly a prop. Ironwood, Thistral tail hair core, 9 inches. He had been excited when he first got it, a pity he'd never managed to cast a spell with it. The wand sat gleaming, perfectly intact. He planned to try modifying that wand. If he could adapt magical equipment, he might build an automatic spellcasting tool, something like the red-white ball. Finally, he fetched the 3rd Philosopher's Stone. This one was still unprocessed, retaining its original ruby-like appearance. As he set the stone on the table, the ring he'd made earlier brushed against it. In an instant, all 3 Philosopher's Stones gave a faint red glow. Before Dudley could react, a lazy trance slipped over him, and a thin, ethereal voice whispered in his ear. Shapes coalesced in the darkness behind his eyelids, and he seemed to see a huge, ancient door slowly materialize before him. Chapter 171, 169. You are already a mature gate of truth. You should learn to open it yourself. The gate! Dudley shook his head. His mind cleared. When he came to, he realized he was no longer in his bedroom. It felt as if his soul had left his body and reappeared somewhere unfamiliar in an instant. Where is this? All around him was a boundless white void. Behind him was the same endless whiteness. Only when he looked straight ahead did something come into focus. A gate. A stone gate. Ancient. Time-worn. Dudley took a few steps forward without thinking and found himself standing before it. Carved into the old stone was a massive magic array. Up close, he could see 10 circular wheels branching like limbs on either side of the gate. At the base, the pattern spread out like 10 wings. The Tree of Life from the Kabbalah. I know where this is. The Gate of Truth. The place every alchemist dreamed of reaching. Before the gate is the alchemist. Behind the gate is truth. Legend said that to push this gate open was to behold truth itself, the alchemical equivalent of a magician's root in some worlds. As he looked at the weathered marks on the gate, a faint, ethereal voice seeped into his ear. Come, push open the gate. Everything you desire waits behind it. Anything can be granted to you. Money, fame, power, beauties, strength. Endless and inexhaustible. If you push this gate open, you can become an omnipotent god. Temptation, desire, and appeal to the heart. But Dudley was unmoved. I refuse. He said it calmly. He wasn't swayed. He knew he wasn't a true, orthodox alchemist. Most of his knowledge came from the system. For him, alchemy had always been a tool. Without hesitation, he turned and started to leave, not even glancing back at the gate that countless alchemists yearned to open. How do I get back? Wait, don't you want anything? The voice asked again, clearer this time. A transparent, indistinct figure materialized beneath the gate and shouted at him. Dudley stopped, his back to the apparition, and answered. Pushing that gate open exacted a price. Some lost limbs, some lost their bodies, some lost their sight. Everything the gate offered could, in theory, be gained by him through his own efforts. It would only take time. Money, fame, power, strength, he had no shortage of those, and the one thing he truly wanted was something the gate couldn't provide. "Can you turn me into a Super Saiyan?" he asked. The figure fell silent. "Or grant Ultra Instinct?" Silence. 72 earthly fiend transformations? 36 heavenly spirit transformations? Longevity with heaven and earth? No answer. If not, a star platinum would do. Still nothing. The gate could speak of equivalent exchange and offer omniscience in theory, but that omniscience was limited by its frame of reference. It couldn't grant what it did not understand. Super Saiyan, Ultra Instinct, Star Platinum, these concepts lay outside its cognition. Different worlds had different laws. You couldn't use an ancient imperial sword to enforce a modern court. The gate could not resurrect the dead, but other worlds, like those of gods or dragons, could. "Since you can't do any of that, don't make such grand claims," Dudley said, indifferent to offending it. The transparent figure then seemed to discover something. Its tone shifted to excitement. The prospect of exploring unknown worlds and acquiring unfamiliar information was worth the exchange to it. It muttered to itself as if convincing itself. Slowly, without anyone pushing, the stone gate opened a hairline crack. "You are already a mature gate of truth. You should learn to open it yourself," the voice intoned. The next instant, everything around Dudley changed. The gate and the white void faded away. He blinked and found himself sitting in his chair again, clutching his magic wand. He checked the time. Less than 10 seconds had passed. It felt like a hallucination, and yet it wasn't. A new, subtle understanding of alchemy had settled into his mind. He snapped his fingers. A red light flashed in the air. Bang! An explosion ripped through his bedroom. It appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly. Technically, it was a form of alchemy, adjusting air density to create an explosive shock, a technique used by a certain flame kernel. Crucially, Dudley had not drawn a transmutation circle, nor used the Philosopher's Stone. He could now activate alchemy without a circle. That was what everyone who had seen the Gate of Truth gained, except they usually paid the price with a lost arm or leg. Dudley had come away unscathed. "How convenient," he muttered. He turned to the pile of materials on the table. Seeing the gate had been an unexpected interlude. Now there were more immediate matters. He clasped his hands and activated magic armor remodeling. Under his control, the mithril seemed to liquefy, then flowed to coat the wand, plating it in a smooth layer of silver white. There wasn't much material, or he might have remodeled the wand in the grand style of Gandalf's staff. Normally it could cast lightning spells. In a pinch it served as a blunt weapon. On the silver-white shaft, Dudley inscribed many small magic array diagrams, lending it an arcane air. Next he set the emerald, still humming with traces of magic, into the wand's center. Finally, he inlaid the magic crystal sapphire as the wand's core. Thanks to the power of his skill, everything went smoothly. In a short while, a brand new wand lay before him, entirely silver white, simple and elegant, yet faintly luxurious, radiating a subtle chill. He held it between his fingers, gave it a gentle wave, and a rainbow shimmered into being in front of him, just like Harry had once done. Chapter 172, 170. Perhaps squibs can also cast spells. Can anyone demonstrate what I just explained? Professor McGonagall spoke slowly, scanning the students below. Blank faces stared back or bowed their heads. No one put up a hand. The lesson was difficult, transfiguring a teapot into a bat, a skill normally taught to 4th years and above. Transfiguration had levels, turning one inanimate object into another. Stone stool to wooden stool, candlestick to needle was the simplest. With a firm grasp of the principles and steady practice, most students could manage that. More difficult was turning a living thing into an inanimate object, ladybug into a button, mouse into a snuff box, which required practice and a fair amount of talent. Many students failed at this, producing incomplete transformations or only altering the outward shape. The hardest feats were changing one living creature into another living creature, or giving an inanimate object life, frog to sheep, person to ferret, or, as McGonagall once demonstrated, a desk into a pig. Those demanded not just practice but real aptitude. Dudley slowly raised his hand. Hermione, seated beside him, paused as if to raise hers, then hesitated and let it fall. She could make the teapot look like a bat, but she couldn't complete the transformation. Harry faced the same problem. He could produce bat wings, not the whole bat. That was the challenge at this level. Once turned into a living creature, the subject had to exhibit living characteristics, or the transfiguration was incomplete. McGonagall looked surprised in a pleased way. Dudley seldom volunteered to demonstrate. Usually he only answered theoretical questions. He often skipped her weekend tutorials, preferring potions or self-study. Professors noticed good students, especially exceptional ones. "Then, Mr. Dursley, please demonstrate for us." Dudley stood. He picked up his wand with one hand and idly traced its side with the fingertips of the other, feeling the unfamiliar texture of the new instrument. He aimed it at the teapot. Sparks flickered from the tip. The teapot's shape softened, its bright glaze paling to a dull gray. In moments, the object shifted into a creature. Large ears, broad wings, round eyes that darted around the classroom. The little bat looked startled and emitted a shriek. Under the student's attention, it flapped upward, clinging to the chandelier and hanging upside down like any ordinary bat. "A perfectly executed transfiguration. 10 points to the house," McGonagall said, clearly delighted. Dudley permitted himself a small smile and slipped the wand back into his sleeve. In the past, he hadn't even managed the simplest charm like Aguamenti. Although he discovered there was magic inside him, for reasons he couldn't explain, he had been unable to release it. He had read widely. The books called that condition squibhood, but Dudley knew he wasn't a squib. There was a fundamental difference. Now, with this modified wand, he could cast smoothly. The wand's critical modification was guidance. Enchanted with runes and a magic circle, it coaxed the magic inside its wielder outward in a controlled stream. The same system engraving and the red and white sphere at Dudley's waist shared the principle. For anyone who had magic but couldn't channel it, this alteration was a godsend. Dudley thought of the squibs he knew, Mrs. Fig and Filch, the caretaker. The data magic eye had shown that squibs did possess magic within them. If a modified wand like his could let squibs cast spells, the implications would be enormous. It would be a breakthrough and could win Dudley many loyal followers. He made a mental note to research that possibility when he had time. The wand offered more than guidance. A sapphire-like crystal embedded in it could supply energy when the caster's reserves ran low, letting even draining charms be performed. Of course, the stored magic would need replenishing after it ran out. There was also the emerald from the diadem, the so-called Stone of Wisdom, which the data magic eye indicated could slightly heighten the user's spiritual sensitivity. That likely explained part of the Ravenclaw diadem's reputed boost to wisdom. The wand's most crucial feature, however, was master recognition. Some Ollivander wands could be uncooperative in the hands of anyone but their owner. Dudley's design made that rejection decisive. If someone else tried to use his wand, they were in for a rude surprise. Dudley had wanted to add other functions, but materials were limited. He would expand it later. For now, he could cast spells reliably. He had expected to be ecstatic. Casting spells had been his dream, but the feeling was muted. It wasn't the same joy he had when breaking through in Ripple Chi Gong. Perhaps because this success relied on a tool, it didn't feel like pure wizardry. Still, by any outward standard, he was now a qualified wizard. Actually, I can do magic, Dudley thought, and it no longer felt like a question. Chapter 173. Lockhart, your deeds are exposed. Spring passed and autumn came, and a year slipped by before the Hogwarts students knew it. They were about to face their end-of-year exams, and on the first day after exams, the professors began assigning holiday work. Don't think that Hogwarts doesn't give final assignments, and don't assume young wizards can play all summer because they can't use magic at home. Hogwarts professors gave plenty of homework, mostly essays. If you didn't keep up over the holidays, you wouldn't be able to finish it. Harry had complained about that during his first-year break more than once. Of course, not every professor planned to assign holiday work. Although I am very regretful, and I would have loved to teach you a few more years, I must leave. Next year, your defense against the dark arts professor will change again. Professor Lockhart, in a sky blue suit, stood on the podium and put on an exaggerated show of sorrow. With what he thought was a charming flourish, he added, "Don't miss me. If you want to write, send me a letter, but don't forget to buy my new book. I will certainly reply." He wasn't going to be teaching next year anyway, so homework was irrelevant. He was already planning his new book, Me in Hogwarts. The Dueling Club, the Basilisk, the Chamber of Secrets. Lockhart felt he had enough material from his year at Hogwarts to fill another volume. Even if, apart from the Dueling Club, those other events had nothing to do with him, that didn't stop him from including them. It's adapted from true events, after all. That never said it had to be exact. If I could, I truly would stay with you longer. You are all exceptional. Miss Hannah, you are a, I hope you will remember me. Mr. Justin, you are a, Mr. Seamus, you are a. Like some school melodrama, he began calling out names, giving each student a flattering farewell. Harry Potter, you will become the rising star of the wizarding world. Especially you, Mr. Dursley. You are the cleverest student I've ever taught. Keep at it. You'll become an excellent wizard. The cliches worked. Many students whose names he called burst into tears. Others barely paid him any attention. And then there's you, Ron. Your hair is as red as your name. Ron, my name is... Finally, you, Neville. Neville, farewell is for a better reunion. I hope that the next time we meet, you'll still call me Professor. You are my students, my beloved students. After finishing, Lockhart dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief, putting on a show of grief so the others could not see. When he finally pulled the handkerchief away, his eyes were red-rimmed, as if from crying. He had stuffed an onion inside the handkerchief, the oldest trick in the book, and undeniably effective. Those who didn't know better believed he was truly reluctant to leave. In fact, he had performed this scene for several year groups already and would be heading to the first years to do it all again shortly. Don't doubt Lockhart's acting. He was professional at it. His performance moved many students. Although Professor Lockhart isn't very capable, he is a good teacher, some thought, choosing to ignore the more outrageous things he'd done that year. He was leaving anyway. Why hold it against him? Feelings had already been stirred. Like with military drill instructors, even those who had loathed him could find themselves crying at the farewell. A melancholy air settled over the classroom. Students who hadn't cried a moment before were now wiping their eyes. Hufflepuffs, honest and soft-hearted, were the worst hit. The atmosphere held until the classroom door was thrown open. A stern-looking middle-aged man stepped in. "Excuse me, Professor Lockhart." "No, Mr. Lockhart, I'm afraid I have to interrupt." He glanced around, a trace of sarcasm on his face. "Oh, perhaps not interrupt. It seems you were already in the middle of saying goodbye." "Mr. Godwin, I don't know what you mean. Did you come to see me about something?" Lockhart replied, a hint of annoyance in his voice. He recognized the man. He was from the Auror office and had crossed paths with him before. "If you cannot give me a reasonable explanation, I will send a letter to Mr. Fudge," Lockhart threatened. As a celebrated author with lots of honors, his name carried weight. He had a large following, and though he held no real power, he liked to believe his word mattered. Mr. Godwin looked at him with barely concealed contempt. "We received a report, Lockhart. Your deeds are exposed. Now we need you to come with us for questioning." A few Aurors in uniform filed into the room behind him. "My deeds are exposed?" Lockhart stared at them, thoughts racing. He thought of the memory charm, how he used it to erase other wizards' memories and take their exploits for himself. That was the real secret. How could they possibly know? He had never told anyone. This was the one thing he had never wanted anyone to find out. With a trembling voice, he asked Mr. Godwin, "Where are we going?" "Wizengamot." At that word, Lockhart began to shake all over. Only offenses like his, abusing the memory charm to steal other people's achievements, could lead to the Wizengamot. Damn it, they really knew. He began to rack his brains frantically. Chapter 174. What's your superpower? Dudley. Super rich. He was nothing like Lucius, who could always buy his way out of trouble. For Lockhart, however much money he donated, no one would help him now. Attacking other wizards, stealing their memories, and profiting from those experiences, no matter how you looked at it, it was despicable. Even if he could buy his way out of immediate blame, once this scandal broke, his reputation would be finished. How would his readers view him? How would other wizards? How would he live after that? "Let go of me. I'm not guilty," Lockhart shouted. Taking advantage of an Auror's momentary distraction, he shoved the man down, snatched his wand, and tried to flee. Godwin and the other Aurors hadn't expected him to fight back. No one had anticipated such raw resistance. Lockhart had actually escaped by sheer force. Is this the standard of an Auror? Dudley thought. Feels lacking. They hadn't restrained him with spells right away. They resorted to physical action, and they hadn't even cleared the crowd. If Lockhart had truly turned violent, the students in the classroom would have been in danger. "Put down your wand. What do you intend to do?" Godwin snapped, tense. The surrounding Aurors took cover. It looked almost comical until you remembered Lockhart's fame. His books and tales painted him as a powerful wizard. Lockhart, seeing the Auror's hesitation, tried to buy time and find a way out. He couldn't be arrested. That would be the end. If he could get away, he might still be able to turn public opinion in his favor. "I solved it all myself." A red flash cut through the air. Lockhart's wand was ripped from his hand and landed squarely in Dudley's. A charm knocked him backwards. "I think Professor Lockhart has another charge, attempting to assault an Auror." The Aurors moved in and took him away. The students, who had been on the verge of tears one minute, were bewildered the next. Hadn't he just been saying goodbye to them? How had he suddenly committed a crime? But the drama was only a brief interruption for Hogwarts. Soon it was time for the results to be announced. Not surprisingly, Dudley came first again. Hermione was close behind. Then Harry, Malfoy, Ron, and Neville, members of the disciplinary group, swept the top 6 places for their year. The group's newest member, Cedric of Hufflepuff, had also taken first in his 4th-year standings. Once again, the disciplinary group had proved its strength. "You absolutely must come to our house this holiday," Ron insisted on the Hogwarts Express back to King's Cross. Last year, they had gone to Neville's. Only Harry had spent the holidays at his own home. This year, it had to be Ron's turn. Malfoy looked reluctant. He would have liked to invite them to Malfoy Manor, but with his father's current situation, that would only invite trouble, unless he were the head of the Malfoy family, which was far from the case. "I think perhaps you should come to our house," Dudley offered. He opened a small pink suitcase and started packing box after box into it. Hermione's luggage was growing heavier by the minute, mostly books. Once books piled up, they were dead weight, she joked. Yet, they were the source of power, too. If only Hermione's trunk had an undetectable extension charm, Dudley thought. Otherwise, he'd never manage to carry it all. "Experience Muggle life?" Ron's eyes lit up. "I've never stayed in a Muggle house. Fred says Muggles have a little box with an engine that moves on its own, like a portrait. I want to see one." "My grandmother will definitely agree," Neville said. If Dudley invited them, Madame Longbottom would approve wholeheartedly. Malfoy frowned. He wanted to go, but Lucius... so infuriating, old-fashioned and obstinate. "No, I mean a wizard's home," Dudley clarified. "I've acquired a property in Godric's Hollow right next to the old Potter house." Ron, Neville, and Malfoy stared. "Dudley, are you saying you bought a house?" Ron repeated, incredulous. "Yes. This holiday I need to redecorate both the old Potter place and the new house," Dudley said. "Want to come help?" Most of the materials had already been moved. All that remained was assembly. Of course, a home should be as secure as possible. In fact, it wasn't just 2 houses. He'd bought several square kilometers of land around them. Ordinary decorating wouldn't be enough. Dudley planned to rebuild and fortify the houses with enchantments, turning them into nearly impenetrable strongholds. He'd always felt something was missing, a lack of security, and this was his way to fix it. "Cool," Malfoy admitted. Even with his money, he couldn't dream of casually buying such property. The Malfoy family had its own constraints. Ron, who knew the Weasley household's limits, could only stare. He finally blurted, "Dudley, just how rich are you now?" Dudley thought for a moment. "In short, countless." If someone asked him his superpower, he'd answer, "super rich." He wasn't sure how to put it exactly, only that one of his Gringotts accounts filled several vaults. The goblins treated him with an almost servile deference, their eyes bright whenever he appeared. They catered to him like he was royalty. Oh, right. There's a little project to earn pocket money. Want to be involved? Dudley added. The first Wizard Card World Championship had been a huge success, and Caro was already preparing to promote the event across Europe. The next championship would surely spark another wave of interest. New card pack bundles were in development, and this time Dudley wanted to release packs featuring famous modern wizards. Portrait rights would be required, so they'd need the wizard's consent. The plan included professors from Hogwarts and other powerful or notorious wizards. Yes, the three of them said in unison. No one would turn down extra galleons. Chapter 175, 173. What do you call a surprise? The Hogwarts Express pulled into the station without incident, and the young witches and wizards filed off one by one. Ron, Malfoy, and Neville lingered to say goodbye to Dudley and his two friends before they left. Dudley and his companions collected their luggage and headed out of the station. This time, Mr. and Mrs. Granger and Vernon weren't late. They had been waiting at the entrance to King's Cross. Hermione climbed into Mr. Granger's car, while Dudley and his friends piled into Vernon's. Dudley and Hermione agreed to meet again in 2 weeks. The two cars were the same model, different colors but clearly bought together, and Vernon's trunk was stuffed with fishing gear, showing he often went fishing with Mr. Granger. Dudley noticed, too, that Vernon's belly had shrunk considerably. "Where's Mum?" Dudley asked as he slid into the car. Petunia would never let Vernon come alone. She'd always be there with him. Her absence had to mean something important. "You'll see soon," Vernon said mysteriously. "It's a surprise." No matter how Dudley and Harry pressed him, Vernon wouldn't say another word. The grin plastered across his face, though, gave everything away. Whatever it was, it looked like good news. They returned to their familiar house. Number 4, Privet Drive. They carried their suitcases in one by one. Thanks to the undetectable extension charm, the luggage looked tiny from the outside. Dudley, however, felt that something was different about the house. There were odd new things here and there. Petunia wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in the sitting room. She wasn't upstairs either. Just as Dudley was about to ask Vernon what was going on, Petunia emerged slowly from the ground floor bedroom. Dudley froze. Petunia's normally flat stomach was hugely swollen, rounded as if she were carrying several balloons beneath her clothes. "This is," Dudley gaped. Harry was just as stunned. He hadn't expected this at all. "Pregnant?" Harry said, because there was no other explanation. Petunia smiled gently and rubbed her belly. "Congratulations, Dudley, Harry. You're going to be big brothers." It was obvious whose doing this was. "When's the due date?" Dudley and Harry helped Petunia to a chair, worried she might need a hand. "About 2 weeks," she said. 2 weeks. That meant she would give birth not long after they returned to Hogwarts. It was all Vernon, Dudley thought. He was actually pleased. He even started pondering whether they should look for a bigger house closer to town so Petunia could get to a hospital easily. He didn't have long to think before Vernon bustled back in from the car, apron on and a spatula in hand. "I said it was a surprise, didn't I? How do you like that for a surprise?" He was obviously proud of himself. "Kids, are you hungry? I'll cook tonight," he announced. "Taste my cooking. I've picked up a few things lately." Everyone exchanged doubtful looks. Vernon had never shown much interest in cooking before. He bristled at their expressions. "Don't underestimate me. Who do you think cooked before Petunia and I got married? Tonight I'll show you what I can do." It turned out his memory of pre-marriage cooking did not translate well into the present. After a lot of clanging and banging in the kitchen, Vernon set a plate of food on the table. Slightly burnt fried eggs, a basin of mushy stewed sauerkraut and sausages, a black, unidentifiable lump, and a canned smoked fish. The spread was unappetizing enough to silence the room. Dudley and Harry stared at the food, unsure where to begin. Petunia shook her head to show she wasn't hungry. Dudley, feeling obliged, picked up a fork and tried a little sauerkraut. His face registered a riot of flavors, sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy, but one crucial seasoning was missing: no salt. Harry, seeing Dudley taste it, tried a piece of the fried egg. It was loaded with sugar, sickeningly sweet. "My cooking's pretty good, isn't it?" Vernon asked, misreading their stunned expressions for admiration. Dudley got up and went back into the kitchen. No wonder Petunia had stopped letting him near the stove. Eating this every day would ruin their stomachs. he reappeared shortly carrying several steaming plates of proper food. Petunia and Harry gratefully ate while Vernon grumbled until he tried his own cooking and then Dudley's. After a mouthful of the better food, his complaints vanished and he ate with gusto. Comparison, Dudley thought, was revealing. Dudley quietly decided he would handle the cooking until Petunia had the baby. Vernon's culinary experiments were too risky for a pregnancy. After dinner and a short rest, the three men went into the garden for their usual evening exercise. Vernon was in high spirits. "Don't think your father just eats. I exercise every day," he boasted, taking off his shirt and flexing heavily muscled arms. It was true that Vernon had been working out. His muscles were denser and his body fat had dropped. He still looked broad and heavy, but he had strength now. He was feeling smug until Harry stripped off his shirt. Harry looked slight in clothes, but underneath he was all muscle. After 2 years of training with Dudley, he had real definition. Then Dudley took off his shirt. Vernon fell silent for a moment, then sheepishly put his shirt back on. Chapter 17, Dursley steamed chicken, chicken soup, braised ribs. Dudley cooked a different dish every day, always with an eye on nutrition. With his money, he could easily have hired a private chef, but he trusted his own cooking more than anyone else's. In 2 short weeks of Dudley's ministrations, Petunia had put on enough weight to look genuinely pregnant, otherwise people would have suspected Vernon of abusing her. Outside the delivery room, the three of them waited nervously. Vernon paced like a child at the door, asking Dudley almost every minute if everything was all right. His round face was pinched with worry. "Don't worry, nothing will happen," Dudley said, more like an adult comforting a baby than the other way round. "There are 2 wizards inside. Even if there's no potion for a natural birth, they have plenty of other recovery potions. They can deal with whatever comes up." After another half hour came a strong, wailing cry. Petunia had delivered smoothly. "Congratulations, Mr. Dursley. Your wife has given birth to a little princess," a nurse announced, and Vernon's anxiety finally eased. The sex of the baby didn't matter so long as Petunia was all right. Vernon was desperate to go in, but the nurse told him she needed rest and the baby needed cleaning and observation before being brought to the nursery. Newborns were fragile and had to be watched for a while. Mr. and Mrs. Granger arrived then with Hermione, bearing supplements and fruit. When the nurses finally allowed Vernon to see Petunia, he burst into the ward like the wind, ignoring the admonition to keep quiet. Petunia lay in the bed looking tired, but essentially fine. Dudley and the others were allowed to see the child as well. The baby's body was tiny and wrinkled, her face and eyes a little swollen. She curled up with her tiny fists clenched. She looked delicate, almost monkey-like in her thinness, but what mattered were her eyes. They had not taken Vernon's blue, they were green. No, greener than Harry's. Her hair was red. "She looks a lot like Lily," Petunia said softly, leaning over the bassinet. Her voice was full of a warmth Dudley had never heard from her before. Seeing her speak of Aunt Lily with that natural longing surprised him. "What will you call her?" Mrs. Granger asked. Vernon and Petunia had already decided. "She'll be called Lily, Lily Dursley," Petunia said, eyes fixed on her daughter. It was a common, respectful way to remember someone close, name a child after them. Dudley watched the sleeping baby and whispered, "I think Professor Snape will definitely like her." "Severus?" Petunia repeated. If Dudley mentioning Snape had surprised her, another surprise followed. "If possible," Petunia said, "I hope he could be Lily's godfather. Lily used to say that wizards liked godparents. Of course, only if she shows any magic and he is willing." "Of course," Dudley said. He imagined the scene in 11 years when Lily arrived at school, a child with red hair and green eyes, bringing both curiosity and unexpected connections. He pictured Snape handing out points. "Lily, answer this potion question. If she gets it right, very good, 10 points for Lily. If she admits she doesn't know, honesty, 10 points for Lily." The thought made him smile. Hermione leaned over the bassinet, lost in her own thoughts as she watched the baby. A faint blush rose over her cheeks. She looked like a ripe little apple you wanted to take a bite out of. A week later, Dudley, Harry, and Hermione left Number 4 Privet Drive as planned. They had delayed only an extra week because of Lily's birth. Dudley had made all the arrangements before they left. Vernon and Petunia were to stay in a villa not far from the Grangers, a temporary residence Dudley had bought, and he had hired nutritionists, bodyguards, and chefs to make sure they were well looked after, with particular attention to Lily's diet. He had the money. Why should it sit idle in the bank when it could protect his family? They arrived at Godric's Hollow. Near the half-renovated Potter Old residence, a small medieval-style castle stood where Dudley had ordered one built. Carlo had finished it a week earlier. Dudley admired how quickly the wizards had worked. With magic, many tasks were much more convenient than any machine could manage. "Very good," Dudley said, patting the solid wall. He pressed a little too hard, trying to test it, and the stone didn't give. Carlo had used the best materials everywhere, exactly to Dudley's specifications. Only someone with Dudley's resources could afford such extravagance. Another wizard might have gone bankrupt halfway through the project. It was built, but not yet finished. Dudley wanted it refitted entirely as a proper, defensible home. He planned similar renovations for the Potter place, too. Once the work was done, he would cast a rebellious charm to make it completely hidden. He even dreamed of turning it into a mobile fortress, a moving wizard tower like those in fantasy novels, but his current abilities and finances didn't allow for that. First things first, he set a goal for himself to earn 100 million galleons within a year and to improve his skills in magical equipment modification. Lily had red hair and green eyes. Dudley wondered, had the Evanses and the Weasleys ever been related? At least both families seemed to favor red hair. Chapter 177, 175. I'll take the master bedroom. You'll stay next to me. That's it. In a clearing in Godric's Hollow, a swarm of Cornish pixies was hard at work. Yes, Cornish pixies, those famously mischievous troublemakers, were tirelessly hauling materials back and forth. Watching them, you would never have guessed they were troublemakers at all. They were more industrious than bees. The leader, aptly called Pixie, wore a yellow plastic hard hat and wielded a plastic baton, chattering non-stop as he directed the others. He looked every bit like a construction foreman. The pixies carried pieces to Dudley, who processed them on the spot. Stone hands rose from the floor to place each finished piece into its proper position. Dudley worked with alchemy in one hand and magic gear modification and processing in the other. With the pixies' help, the modification work flew along. Hermione was in charge of designing the layout for every room in the castle, while Harry ran errands in Diagon Alley for decorations. Clear divisions of labor had dramatically accelerated the renovation. Inside the castle, the once menacing fox maidens were either pushing rags together, holding feather dusters in tandem, or carrying brooms, cleaning the rooms that had already been refurbished. Outside, a gang of short, formerly lazy goblins, each armed with comically oversized shears, trimmed the lawn with surprising diligence. Every creature had its use. Even the fox maidens and goblins, dismissed as pests by other wizards, contributed here. Dudley had managed to catch and tame them. Their low intelligence had made them untamable before, but after his skills upgraded to level 2, he could handle them. Inexplicably, after he appeased the basilisk, his taming and magical beast language skills had leveled up to LV2. Dudley had no idea why. He only guessed it might be linked to the number of magical creatures he'd encountered. LV2 still wasn't enough to tame something on the scale of a basilisk or a dragon. Otherwise, Dudley might have become some kind of cosplay beast tamer. On the steps outside the gate, a niffler lay sprawled on its back, basking in the sun and making contented little snorts. Dudley had found it in the Forbidden Forest, along with a fwooper and a mandrake. Good food and rest had put weight on the niffler. It looked much fatter these days. Flue powder is such a hassle. Every time I use it, I get covered in dust, Harry complained as he stepped into the courtyard, specks of ash on his robes. He pulled out his wand and gave it a swift flick. The dirt vanished instantly. The Scourgify charm never failed. Once renovations are done, I want an automatic cleaning fireplace in the reception room. That would save a lot of trouble. Dudley chatted as he worked, but his hands were busy. Harry produced item after item from his bag, which of course had been placed under an undetectable extension charm, the single most convenient enchantment in the wizarding world. "Dudley, these are the seeds you asked for," Harry said, handing over several sacks. "Perfect," Dudley replied, pleased. "Let's start with this one." He sprinkled seeds along the edge of the yard, then unclipped the red and white sphere hanging from his waist. "Go, walking grass." A flash of white and a sleepy, yawning mandrake appeared. Mandrakes are nocturnal. By day, they usually lie buried with only a few leaves showing, but Dudley's mandrake had been tamed and could move freely in daylight, though it still needed to adjust to the time shift. "Walking grass, use growth on those seeds," Dudley ordered. The mandrake cocked its head in confusion for a moment, then, as if understanding, shuffled over to the scattered seeds and began to dance. From its emerald green leaves, it fluffed out a shower of orange-yellow pollen. Seeds that normally would take over 10 days to germinate shot up through the soil in an instant. Normal mandrakes didn't have any ripening ability. They were only known for cries that caused fainting, hallucinations, or worse. Dudley's mandrake, however, had gained a useful plant growth talent after being tamed. It might not help much in a fight, but it was invaluable for logistics. "Water and fertilize," Dudley murmured. Cornish pixies zipped over with watering cans and sacks of fertilizer and began irrigating and feeding the soil. In minutes, the tiny shoots erupted into thorny brambles that wrapped around the flower beds, forming a natural barrier. Dudley had chosen iron thistle seeds for basic defense. He'd considered Devil's Snare. The defensive properties were far superior, but Devil's Snare shrank from light and simply couldn't be planted in an open yard unless the castle were covered by a huge canopy to keep it in perpetual darkness. That wasn't an option. "The effect's good," Dudley said as he surveyed the thistles encircling the castle and nodded in satisfaction. "Try the next batch." With the mandrake's help, the flower beds soon filled with a variety of magical plants. Dudley praised the mandrake a few times, offered it a bag of its favorite snacks, and then called it back into the red and white sphere. Even Harry, who'd seen a lot by now, couldn't help but admire the mandrake's unusual ability. "Amazing," he said. Hermione's voice floated from inside the main door. "Dudley, I think we should talk about room allocation." The door swung inward, startling the Niffler at the bottom of the steps. On spotting Hermione, the Niffler let out a delighted squeak and scampered up onto her shoulder. Its little black eyes immediately fixated on the sapphire ring gleaming on her hand. Nifflers loved shiny things and would happily hoard any treasure they could get their paws on, but it wasn't going to try to take Hermione's ring. It knew Dudley had given it to her. "I'll take the master bedroom," Dudley said decisively. "You'll stay next to me. That's it." Hermione's face flushed the color of a blooming rose. Chapter 178, Dangerous Cabbage Field. It was almost time for the meeting with his friends. Malfoy and Neville had already arrived at Godric's Hollow via the Floo network, but Ron still hadn't made it. His family had just won the Daily Prophet's annual Galleon Award, 700 galleons, and the Weasleys were planning a trip to Egypt to visit Bill. Before they even reached the house, Malfoy stopped, eyes widening at the sight of a ring of iron, thorny anti-theft fencing taller than a man surrounding the property. "I really should suggest to Lucius that he get one too," he said. Malfoy Manor had almost no obvious defenses. Anyone could walk in if they wanted. It was telling that Malfoy now referred to Lucius more formally, no longer proudly calling him "my dad." The iron thorns weren't meant to stop a wizard. Rather, they were a warning. A wizard who tried to clear them would immediately alert the owner. As they stepped through the large iron garden gate, Neville and Malfoy both lit up, as if they'd entered another world. "It's not much worse than my family's manor," Malfoy admitted, even as he took in the place. His own manor was enormous, but felt empty. The central fountain and the white peacock were about all it had to recommend it. Dudley's garden, by contrast, was a tapestry of lawns and beds, each planted with different kinds of magical vegetation. There were plants Malfoy couldn't name, each with its own strange traits. Pixies and butterflies and other little magical creatures flitted among the beds, making the whole place dazzling. In the center of the grounds stood a small, 5-story ancient castle. It had been largely renovated, and Dudley and his companions had been living there for a while. The old Potter residence nearby had been tidied up too, but Harry had no intention of moving back. His parents weren't there, and neither was Dudley, so it wouldn't feel like home. In interior space, the ancient castle actually beat Malfoy Manor with its 5 floors. Its plot was a bit smaller, but counting the Potter House, the two properties together were no less impressive. Part of the reason Dudley hadn't bought something bigger wasn't money, but location. Godric's Hollow was a legendary village, a birthplace of Gryffindor, and people there didn't always sell to anyone, however wealthy, unlike Malfoy Manor, which was so remote you could go miles without seeing another soul. Malfoy, if I were you, I wouldn't go any further, Harry said suddenly, stepping between Malfoy and the vegetable beds. Malfoy looked ready to push forward through a patch of magical pumpkins and ignored him at first. It's just cabbage. What's there to worry about? Potter, are you losing it? Neville, walking behind them, didn't look amused. He was staring hard at one bed of cabbages. Their color wasn't the usual emerald green. These were tinged with orange-yellow at the outer leaves. What is that? Neville asked. Malfoy finally looked closer, and seeing Neville's expression, realized Harry wasn't joking. Harry, I don't mean to pry, but Neville answered for him, voice tight with interest. Those cabbages, if I'm not mistaken, are biting cabbages. Biting cabbages? What are those? Malfoy gaped. Herbology had never been his thing. He'd gotten by, but he'd never studied these. Neville, who'd become something of a herbology expert, explained. Biting cabbage, technically called the Chinese biting cabbage, was a magical plant, and not the gentle leafy cabbage Muggles knew. These had a huge mouth lined with sharp teeth at their hearts, and they were aggressive. More frightening still, they could move. In numbers, they could even bring down a dragon. Malfoy took an involuntary step back, trying to put as much distance between himself and the vegetable patch as possible, and his footsteps grew light and careful, as if afraid to wake the plants. That cabbage patch alone was a major defensive measure. It upgraded the castle's security in a way few wards could. These cabbages have a slow growth cycle, and they're demanding to cultivate, Harry said. Dudley put a lot of effort into them. Shh, Potter, quiet, Malfoy hissed, suddenly very cowed. Harry shook his head, a little helpless. Relax. Without Dudley's command, they won't come out on their own. Just don't step into them, and you'll be fine. Neville tore his eyes away reluctantly and followed the others. As a top herbology student, he appreciated the cabbages all the more. There was something almost proud about them, like sentinels in green armor. They crossed the garden and reached the ancient castle's main gate. Malfoy frowned at the featureless door. How do we get in? Dudley had modified the gate. There was no doorknob, no keyhole. You couldn't even use Alohomora. There was nowhere to aim it. Harry gave Malfoy a look that made him feel like a country bumpkin, which only made Malfoy shift awkwardly. Harry stepped up to the gate. Facial recognition passed, a slightly mechanical voice announced, and the gate slowly swung open. Malfoy forgot his embarrassment and gaped. What kind of magic is that? Something like the Ravenclaw Eagle Knocker, Harry said. It recognizes us. Cool, Malfoy breathed, and the three of them passed through into the castle. Chapter 179, 177. I think so too. The moment they entered the ancient castle, Malfoy and Neville, two children who had grown up in the wizarding world, suddenly looked like country bumpkins again. The decor was completely different from the mainstream wizarding aesthetic, an odd blend of fantasy and science fiction. Led by Harry, the group came into the dining room where Dudley and Hermione had been waiting. Neville, Draco, welcome to our home. The words "our home" brought a brilliant smile to Harry's face and made Hermione, sitting next to Dudley, flush and shyly look away. Serve the food. Dudley sat up straight and snapped his fingers. The lights brightened at once. Though the sun had already set and night was falling, the room glowed as if it were daytime. Cornish pixies, dressed in suits and ties, flew in from the doorway, carrying plates and set them on the long dining table. The smell of the dishes made everyone's mouths water. Malfoy casually speared a bite with his fork. It melted on his tongue, far better than anything he'd had at home. When he learned Dudley had cooked everything himself, he exclaimed, "Dee, you can cook?" At Hogwarts, Dudley never showed us this, Harry said proudly. Dee's cooking is the best. Anyone who didn't know better might think Harry was praising himself. Don't be shy. Eat as much as you want. I made a lot. Dudley nodded toward a platter of crispy, roasted pork knuckle, and then, without ceremony, grabbed it with his hands and devoured it at a furious pace. Meat was best eaten in big chunks, in his opinion. Malfoy had only just taken his second forkful when Dudley had already finished that plate and was reaching for the next. Perhaps from spending time with Dudley, Harry and Hermione had picked up his hurry. They ate fast, too. The food on the table dwindled visibly. At first, Malfoy tried to be reserved, but seeing the feast disappearing, he dropped his restraint and joined in. Neville, larger and hungrier than the rest, was even more voracious. In no time, the table full of delicacies was swept away like a whirlwind. With a wave of his hand, a group of fox maidens sensibly flew in, collected the plates, and carried them back to the kitchen. Dudley wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked around. "There's still time before school starts. Is there anything you want to do?" Even if they explored the ancient castle room by room, it would only take a few days, and there were still 2 full months before term. They had agreed with their families not to return home in that time. Malfoy had expected his father to forbid the trip, but Lucius had surprised him. He'd agreed, and even told Malfoy to learn as much as he could from Dudley before returning. For all his arrogance, Lucius was not foolish. He had a sense of the long view. Hermione was the first to speak up. "We should use the rest of vacation to study. The OBULs are in 5th year, and we don't have much time. When we go back this year, we'll be in 3rd year," Harry added. "There's only a little over 4 years until graduation," Hermione said, emphasizing how little time they had left. Dudley appreciated Hermione's sense of urgency, though his priorities were different. He knew Voldemort, Tom Riddle, had been badly damaged by Harry. 2 Horcruxes destroyed, and his main remnant of soul neutralized. Voldemort would not simply sit idle. Believing wholeheartedly in the prophecy that named Harry as his nemesis, he would obsess over revenge. Wizards like Voldemort and the old Dumbledore, to advance further, had to confront their obsessions. Voldemort had apparently been defeated by Harry, but Dudley suspected he would come back if he gathered enough power, rallied followers, and tried by any means to kill Harry in front of everyone. The disciplinary group's students were strong, but against vicious adult wizards, Harry and his friends were still not nearly powerful enough. Dudley had experience with the Ministry of Magic and knew it was unreliable, timid before Death Eaters, aggressive with ordinary wizards. "I agree." Surprisingly, Malfoy was the first to back Hermione. He wasn't lazy like Ron exactly, but he wasn't studious either, unless it served his goals. Malfoy had already set his sights on becoming head of the Malfoy family as soon as possible. Of course, that meant displacing the current head. What a dutiful son. "I think so too," Neville said, nodding after Hermione and Malfoy. But Neville had a more specific idea. "We should step up our training in black magic defense," he said. Harry agreed readily. He was still dissatisfied with how he and Dudley had handled the basilisk at the end of last semester, and strongly wanted more practical black magic defense training. After all, the essence of those classes was hands-on combat. "Me too," Neville echoed again, nodding eagerly. All 3 of them looked to Dudley. He would make the final call. Seeing their eagerness pleased him. "We must balance theory and practice," Dudley said slowly. "Besides the basic course material, I think we should learn some advanced magic." He meant powerful, practical charms. Start with the Patronus charm. This year, a group of dark creatures that every Hogwarts student would have to face was making an appearance. Dementors. They would be perfect practice targets. Figuring out how to face 10 or more Dementors at once head-on would be a central focus for the disciplinary group this year. Those who could meet the standard would be eligible to join. Dudley's gaze landed on the copy of the Daily Prophet on the table. He skimmed a story about the Weasleys and wondered if that big dog in Azkaban had seen the paper. Chapter 180, 178. "Professor Lockhart, Mr. Dursley, help me." "Dudley, is this the profound magic you were talking about?" Hermione asked, raising an eyebrow. Dudley was lounging in a chair, a familiar book open in his hands, a novel by Gilderoy Lockhart. Hermione's tone was full of suspicion. "Does anything Lockhart writes even qualify as profound magic?" she added. Within the disciplinary group, Lockhart's reputation was a joke. Inept at practical magic, publicly humiliated in a duel with Neville, and accused of improper relations with a student. Those stains didn't wash off. No, he wrote it, but the content is based on real events. The protagonist wasn't him, Dudley said, setting the book down with a careful seriousness. The title was Wandering with Werewolves. The Aurors had initially arrested Lockhart over that scandal, a professor having relations with a student. He'd resisted and even attacked an Auror, now which layered on another charge. With his celebrity, one might expect he could bribe his way out, but the interrogations revealed something worse. Lockhart had been stealing other wizards' adventures and achievements and erasing their memories with the memory charm to pass them off as his own. Lockhart attacked those wizards? Stole their achievements? Hermione snapped, teeth clenched. What an incorrigible scoundrel. If plagiarism was bad, the combination of theft and erasure, silencing the original owners, was worse. So he's in Azkaban, Dudley said, tapping the book's cover. Rightly so. The deeds in this book belong to other wizards. They weren't invented. Dudley emphasized the line about the wizard in the book curing a werewolf not with wolfsbane potion, but with charms. Hermione's face changed. Oh my goodness. Up to now, the wolfsbane potion was the only known way to preserve a werewolf's mind and return them to human form between transformations. If Lockhart's account were true, if charms could restore a werewolf's sanity, that would be revolutionary. Most werewolf wizards were poor, ostracized, or forced into dark circles by circumstance. Wolfsbane was expensive and difficult to brew. Many could not afford it. A charm that could grant the same result would be a miracle for them, and a boon to the whole magical community. I should go see the former Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Dudley decided. Azkaban was the highest security prison in the wizarding world, a bleak island in the North Sea watched over by dementors that fed on happy memories. Its skies were almost always overcast. The Ministry nominally sent prisoners there, but the dementors were separate creatures, fearsome guardians that were neither employed by nor entirely subordinate to the Ministry. The Ministry dumped prisoners on the island and arranged to be allowed to do so. In return, they fed and tolerated the Dementors. There was an agreement. Dementors could not leave Azkaban without reason, nor attack Ministry personnel. By the time Dudley arrived at the island, the official on the boat was already cautious. "Mr. Dursley, we can only take you this far. Beyond here is where Lockhart is imprisoned," the jailer warned, eyes flicking nervously toward the black robes hovering over the water. Dudley ignored the hovering figures and walked straight to the cell block. Inside a small, dim cell sat a disheveled man, collapsed against the wall, Gilderoy Lockhart. Time in Azkaban had been cruel to him. He looked hollowed out. The jailers said Lockhart was a particular favorite of the Dementors. He'd had so many pleasant recollections that the Dementors had feasted richly. "My dear Professor Lockhart, you look dreadful," Dudley said dryly. "Your next book should be Me in Azkaban, not Me in Hogwarts. It might even be popular." The remark drew Lockhart's attention. At the sound of Dudley's name, he lurched forward as if grasping at a lifeline. "Mr. Dursley, help me," he begged, voice quivering. Azkaban left marks that made a frightened man even more desperate. Lockhart's usual vanity seemed buried under panic. Dudley's expression hardened. "I think we should make a deal," he said, pulling a few books from his coat and holding them out. Each of those books represented a wizard whose memories Lockhart had stolen. Each contained an achievement Dudley wanted. The Ministry would not be tracking down all the victims, and waiting for them was pointless. Dudley needed information, and Lockhart had it. I'll tell you everything, if you get me out of here," Lockhart sobbed, flinging himself toward the grate. Tears wet his cheeks. His image of pomp and pretense was gone. He sounded like a man begging for his life. Dudley did not flinch. "Professor Lockhart," he said quietly, "I don't think you've understood the arrangement. I'm not negotiating. I make the terms." Lockhart's pleading only intensified. "Please, anything. I'll write another book. You can refuse," Dudley said, voice cold, "if you can bear the consequences." He didn't threaten theatrically. He only reached out and touched Lockhart's arm, and the man convulsed as if hit by a sudden, searing pain. Lockhart dropped to the floor, twitching, eyes wide with shock. Dudley had merely stimulated his pain nerves, an old, cruel trick, and the reaction was immediate. "You wouldn't think I'm more merciful than a Dementor, would you?" Dudley asked softly, watching Lockhart struggle. Lockhart's sobs changed into a broken, urgent whisper. No, no, please. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you about the charms. I'll tell you whose memories I took. Just get me out, please. Dudley regarded him for a long moment, the book still in his hand, the cold North Sea wind whipping at the cell block, and then nodded once.